My name is Camelia. I am an environmental engineer, and on the night of our biggest product launch, my Uncle Dawson locked me out of the company building in the rain. I stood on the pavement with my bag on my shoulder and nothing else. Through the gap in the glass doors, my cousin Mackenzie smiled and said the thing she had been saying my whole life. "You can't do anything on your own, Camelia. You are desperate." The next morning, I drove to the bank to use an old keycard my mentor Hayden had left me years ago. The manager swiped it, looked at her screen, and went white. "Ma'am," she whispered, "please sit down. You need to see this." 48 hours later, Dawson was not the one giving orders anymore. If you have ever had your hard work stolen by someone with a better last name, drop a comment with where you are listening from. The rain was freezing, slicing through my thin coat as I stood outside the corporate headquarters of Apex EcoCorp. Inside, the grand boardroom was a theater of warmth and luxury. I could see everything through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I watched the 6 major investors nodding in profound approval. I watched Dawson, my uncle, and the CEO beaming with manufactured pride. And I watched Mackenzie. She was wearing a designer suit that cost more than my first car, effortlessly gliding across the stage. She was clicking through a presentation that I had spent 4 years writing. She was taking credit for the ecological filtration membrane that I had built with my own hands in the laboratory. The security guard inside the lobby shifted uncomfortably. He kept his hand near his radio, watching me. He expected a scene. He expected me to pound my fists against the tempered glass, to scream about injustice, to cry until my makeup ran down my face. That is what people do when their life's work is ripped away from them in a single, brutal moment. I did not give them that satisfaction. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood there for a long moment, memorizing the look of triumph on Mackenzie's face. I memorized the arrogant nod Dawson gave her. I let the cold reality wash over me, clearing away years of misplaced loyalty. They thought they had won. They thought that by taking my laptop and locking me out, they had secured the innovation for themselves. But science is not a PowerPoint presentation. Science is an understanding of complex systems, a delicate balance of biology and physics. Mackenzie had stolen the map, but she had absolutely no idea how to read it. She was presenting a beautiful shell, completely unaware of the intricate algorithms required to make the core actually function. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. I offered the nervous security guard a polite, small smile, turned around, and walked toward the parking lot. My footsteps were steady, unhurried, and calm. I got into my car and started the engine, letting the heater chase away the chill. I felt a strange, profound sense of liberation. I thought I was just walking away from a stolen patent. I thought it was just corporate greed. But what I did not know at that exact moment was the terrifying depth of their plan. They were not just trying to steal my engineering. They were going to kill people. I drove for 2 hours, leaving the gleaming skyscrapers of Chicago behind. The landscape shifted from manicured corporate parks to rusting industrial decay. I was heading to Pine Ridge, the town where I was born. It was a place the billionaires in the city pretended did not exist. As I crossed the county line, the familiar, metallic smell of sulfur and rust seeped through the car vents. This was a town dying a slow death. The groundwater had been contaminated by heavy metals decades ago, abandoned by the very factories that had built the local economy. I pulled into the cracked driveway of a modest, fading house. My sister opened the door before I even knocked. She looked exhausted, her eyes lined with chronic worry, but I was not looking at her. I was looking at the small boy sitting on the living room rug. My nephew, Noah, was 7 years old. He looked smaller than he should. As I walked in, a violent, rattling cough shook his fragile chest. It was a sound I heard in my nightmares. A sound born from drinking tap water that ran a pale, sickly yellow. "Auntie Camelia," Noah croaked, his voice raspy. He offered a weak smile. Did you finish the magic machine? I knelt down beside him, brushing a damp curl from his forehead. His skin felt too warm. I am working on it, buddy, I said, keeping my voice steady and soft. Will it make this sweet water? He asked, his eyes wide with a simple, desperate hope. The kind that doesn't burn my throat. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, fighting the lump in my throat. I pictured the crystal clear water sitting in my lab at Apex. The water I had purified, using the very technology Mackenzie was currently parading in front of investors. I had not spent 16-hour days in a windowless room for a bonus or a promotion. I had done it for Noah. I had done it so thousands of children in towns just like Pine Ridge could turn on a faucet without fear. I looked at the glass of boiled, cloudy water sitting on the coffee table. Dawson and Mackenzie did not see human lives. They saw profit margins. They saw Pine Ridge as a write-off. I pulled Noah into a gentle hug, resting my chin on his shoulder. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable, something cold and sharp. I was not going to let them win. I was going to get the machine back, and I was going to bring the sweet water home. It was 11:30 at night. The house in Pine Ridge was quiet, save for the rhythmic, troubled breathing of Noah sleeping in the next room. I sat at the small kitchen table, the harsh glow of my laptop illuminating the dark room. When I built the operating system for the ecological filtration membrane, I knew better than to trust the corporate servers entirely. I had written a silent, encrypted backdoor into the core diagnostic software, a master key that only I possessed. I typed in a string of commands, my fingers flying across the keys with methodical precision. The screen flashed, bypassing the Apex security firewalls effortlessly. I pulled up the latest commit logs. I needed to see exactly what Mackenzie had done to my prototype before she presented it. I scrolled through the system architecture, and then I saw it. My blood ran completely cold. Mackenzie had not just stolen the code, she had altered it. She had gone into the safety parameters and manually downgraded the microbial filtration threshold to 40%. I stared at the numbers, sick to my stomach. Running the system at 40% meant they could manufacture the membranes for a fraction of the cost, maximizing their profit margin for the upcoming investor round. But it also meant the system would fail to catch synthetic microplastics and trace toxic elements. If this downgraded machine was installed in Pine Ridge, it would not just fail to clean the water. The chemical reaction at that low threshold would actually bind the heavy metals into a more volatile state. It would poison the water supply permanently. It was a fatal downgrade. Mackenzie was trading human lives for a cheaper production cost, and Dawson was clearly allowing it. I leaned back in the hard wooden chair, the sheer evil of the calculation washing over me. They did not care if the machine actually worked safely. They only cared if it looked good enough to secure a massive buyout. I closed the laptop slowly. Panic is a useless emotion. Instead of panicking, my mind went to a conversation I had 3 years ago. I remembered my late mentor, Professor Hayden. Before he passed away, he had handed me a sealed envelope. Dawson is a shark, Camellia. Hayden had said, his voice grave. Sharks do not share? Keep this safe. Only open it when the Empire finally shows its fangs. I stood up, walked to my overnight bag, and pulled out the old, worn envelope. It was time. I stared at the thick paper of the envelope in my hands. The wax seal was still intact. Before breaking it, my mind drifted back to the very beginning, tracing the invisible chain that had kept me bound to Dawson for so long. People always wonder why talented individuals stay in toxic environments. Why endure the theft of your ideas? Why smile while someone else takes the credit? The answer is rarely stupidity. Usually, it is a much more insidious trap. It is the crushing weight of engineered gratitude. When I was 18, living in a trailer park in Pine Ridge, my parents had passed away in a tragic industrial accident. Dawson, my wealthy uncle from the city, swooped in. He paid for my college tuition. He bought me a reliable car. He offered me an internship at his prestigious company. To the outside world, he was the generous patriarch saving his poor, orphaned niece. But behind closed doors, every dollar was a ledger entry. Every opportunity came with a subtle reminder of where I came from. "You are so lucky to be here, Camellia," he would say during family dinners, ensuring everyone heard. "Without me, you would still be drinking rust in the dirt." He cultivated a profound imposter syndrome within me. He made me believe that my brilliant mind was not my own, but a byproduct of his charity. I became the perfect, silent worker. I convinced myself that letting Mackenzie take the spotlight was simply the tax I owed for my survival. I normalized their cruelty. I told myself that the emotional abuse was just the cost of doing business with family. It is terrifying how easily you can become comfortable in a cage if the person who built it tells you it is a sanctuary. But seeing that downgraded code changed everything. The illusion shattered. Dawson had not saved me out of love. He had invested in me because he recognized a high-yield asset, and now, to protect his investment, he was willing to sacrifice the town I loved and the little boy sleeping down the hall. The invisible chain of gratitude snapped entirely. I owed that man absolutely nothing. I was not an imposter. I was the architect. I slid my thumb under the flap of the envelope and broke the wax seal. Inside was a single, heavy brass keycard for a secure vault at the Central Bank of Chicago, accompanied by a small, handwritten note from Hayden. The truth always requires a legal armor. The note read, "I placed the keycard in my pocket. Tomorrow morning, I was going to the bank." I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, turning the heavy brass keycard over and over in my hands. The cool metal was a tether to the only person in the corporate world who had ever truly seen me. Professor Hayden had been the lead researcher at Apex EcoCorp when I first arrived as a naive, overly grateful intern. He was a man who lived entirely for the science, a brilliant mind who cared more about cellular structures than stock options. While Dawson saw me as a charity case and a convenient public relations prop, Hayden saw an equal. He was the one who had stayed late with me in the laboratory, drinking terrible machine coffee while we debated the binding properties of synthetic polymers. He was the one who taught me to trust my own calculations, even when the executive board pushed for faster, sloppier results. And, most importantly, Hayden was the one who understood exactly what kind of man my uncle was. I remembered the afternoon he handed me the envelope. Just weeks before his heart finally gave out. He had looked incredibly tired, his eyes shadowed with the weight of corporate secrets. He told me that brilliance was a liability in a building full of thieves. He told me to build a fortress around my mind, because eventually, Dawson would try to claim it as his own property. I had not fully understood the warning then. Now, it was the only thing keeping me grounded. My phone vibrated against the wooden table, startling me out of my memories. It was a text message, sent through a secure, encrypted application I had installed on a few trusted devices. The sender was Haley. Haley was a junior technician at Apex, a quiet, observant woman who had been my right hand for the past 2 years. She was the only person in that sprawling glass building who knew how much of the membrane project was actually mine. She had seen Mackenzie sweeping into the laboratory once a month for a photo opportunity, only to vanish when the actual work began. The message on my screen was brief, but it spoke volumes. "The laboratory is a complete disaster. Mackenzie tried to run a simulated cycle for the board of directors. She crashed the microbial balance program. She has absolutely no idea how to recalibrate the baseline." I stared at the glowing words. A younger, more vindictive version of myself might have smiled. I might have felt a rush of petty triumph knowing that my cousin was publicly failing to pilot the ship she had stolen. But there was no joy in this. The failure of that machine meant the continued suffering of Pine Ridge. I typed a quick reply. "Keep your head down, Haley. Do not offer to fix it. Let them drown." I locked my phone and slipped the brass keycard securely into my pocket. Hayden had given me the shield. It was time to start forging the sword. The game was changing. Before I could move forward, my mind pulled me backward, returning to the morning of the presentation. The memory was a cold, sharp stone in my shoe, demanding to be acknowledged. I needed to remember exactly how the betrayal had unfolded, so I would never make the mistake of trusting them again. It was 8 a.m, 1 hour before the investors were scheduled to arrive. I was standing in Dawson's pristine corner office, adjusting the collar of my blazer, running through my speaking notes. I was nervous, but I was ready. This was the culmination of 4 years of relentless, exhausting labor. Then, the heavy oak doors opened, and Mackenzie strolled in. She did not carry a single file. She held a cup of artisan coffee and wore a smile that felt entirely too rehearsed. Dawson stepped out from behind his massive mahogany desk and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. His grip was tight, bordering on painful. "Camellia," he had said, his voice dripping with that manufactured, paternal warmth. "There has been a slight change in the agenda. Mackenzie is going to deliver the presentation today." I had blinked, the words not fully computing. I looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows, at the Chicago skyline, trying to anchor myself. I told him that made no sense. Mackenzie did not know the molecular breakdown. She did not know the fail-safes. She had not written a single line of the operational code. Dawson's smile had vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating glare of a predator. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "The investors do not care about molecular breakdowns, Camellia," he hissed, his voice dropping to a low, threatening register. "They care about the narrative. They want to see the future CEO of Apex EcoCorp standing at that podium. They want the family name. You are a brilliant girl, but you are not the face of this company. You are the shadow." He tightened his grip on my shoulder. "You will sit in the back row. You will smile. And you will let your cousin take this across the finish line. Do this for the family, Camellia. Remember everything I have done for you. Remember where you would be without me." It was the ultimate manipulation. The final pulling of the strings he had attached to me when I was just a grieving teenager. He expected me to bow my head. He expected the ingrained imposter syndrome to paralyze me into submission. But looking at Mackenzie, who was already casually checking her reflection in the glass, something inside my chest simply stopped beating. The loyalty I had carried for him evaporated like water on a hot stove. It was a profound, silent death of my remaining illusions. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply removed his hand from my shoulder, turned on my heel, and walked into the boardroom to pack my things. My loyalty was gone. By noon, the next day, the reality of my absence had clearly set in at Apex EcoCorp. My phone began to ring. It did not stop. I sat on a stool in my dusty, cluttered garage, watching the screen of my phone light up again and again. The caller identification flashed Dawson's name repeatedly. When he could not get through, the calls started coming from Mackenzie and then from the chief operating officer. They were panicking. I let every single call go to the automated voicemail. I had zero interest in hearing their voices in real time. I preferred to examine their desperation from a comfortable, analytical distance. After the 14th missed call, a voicemail notification appeared. I tapped the screen, putting the audio on speaker while I continued wiping down a folding table with a damp cloth. Dawson's voice filled the hollow space of the garage. He sounded out of breath, the thin veneer of his corporate polish completely cracking. "Camellia, sweetheart," he began, attempting a tone of gentle reprimand that made my skin crawl. "We need you to come back to the office. Mackenzie seems to have locked herself out of the microbial balancing protocol, and the system is demanding an override password. Just a silly technical glitch. Call me back immediately. We are family, Camellia. We can work through this little misunderstanding." He paused, and I could hear the heavy, ragged sound of his breathing. When he spoke again, the fake sweetness was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated venom. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat. You are going to give us that password? You signed a non-disclosure agreement. I own everything in your head. If you do not walk through these doors in the next hour, I will ruin you. I will tie you up in litigation until you are bankrupt." The message clicked off. I picked up the phone. I did not feel a spike of adrenaline. I did not feel fear. I felt the cold, hard certainty of a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. He was terrified. He was threatening me because he had absolutely no leverage left, and he finally realized it. I pressed a few buttons, navigating to the contact settings. I blocked his personal number. Then I blocked Mackenzie. I blocked the corporate switchboard and the chief operating officer. I severed the digital umbilical cord with a few simple swipes of my finger. I put the phone face down on a shelf and surveyed the garage. It was a mess of old cardboard boxes and forgotten winter coats. But the bones were good. It had electricity, running water, and decent ventilation. It was entirely mine. I rolled up my sleeves and started moving the heavy boxes. I swept the concrete floor until it was spotless. I was not just cleaning a room. I was preparing a battleground. I worked in absolute silence. It took exactly 48 hours of relentless, uninterrupted labor to transform my garage into a functioning workspace. I slept in short, restless bursts, fueled by black coffee and the haunting memory of Noah's rattling cough. I did not have the billion-dollar budget of Apex EcoCorp. I did not have their gleaming titanium centrifuges or their climate-controlled clean rooms. But I had the mathematics in my head, and I knew exactly how to bend standard, commercial-grade hardware to my will. On the third night, a soft, rhythmic knock sounded at the side door of the garage. I opened it to find Haley standing in the dark, shivering in the cool night air. She was holding a heavy plastic cooler bag and looking nervously over her shoulder. I ushered her inside quickly and locked the deadbolt behind her. Haley unzipped the cooler and pulled out 3 specialized circuit boards I had quietly asked her to procure. Then, she pulled out 2 large glass jars. The water inside them was a cloudy, toxic yellow, swirling with heavy sediments. She had driven out to Pine Ridge that afternoon to collect the raw samples I needed. "It is getting worse over there," Haley whispered, looking around the makeshift laboratory with wide eyes. "And it is getting worse at the office. Jeremy, the venture capital guy, is demanding a live demonstration by Friday. Dawson is threatening to fire the entire engineering floor if we do not bypass your encryption." "They will never bypass it," I said calmly, taking the jars from her hands. "The encryption is woven into the core operational logic. If they break the lock, they break the machine." Haley nodded, watching me as I moved toward my workbench. I had constructed a scaled-down version of the filtration membrane using PVC pipes, industrial carbon filters, and the newly acquired circuit boards. It looked like a high school science project compared to the Apex prototype, but the heart of it was identical. I poured the contaminated Pine Ridge water into the upper reservoir. I double-checked the wiring, ensuring the power supply was grounded. Then, I flipped the main switch. The machine hummed to life. The sound was a low, steady vibration that rattled the tools on my workbench. We stood in silence, watching the yellow water cycle through the complex series of chambers. The microbial algorithm kicked in, breaking down the synthetic toxins at a microscopic level. For a terrifying minute, nothing came out of the bottom spout. Then, a single drop formed. It fell into the clean glass beaker below. Then another. Soon, a steady, thin stream was flowing. Haley gasped softly, her hands covering her mouth. I picked up the beaker and held it up to the harsh fluorescent light of the garage. There was no yellow tint. There was no sediment. The water was perfectly, beautifully clear. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. The water was clean, but a dark, Unresolved question still clawed at the back of my mind. Why had Mackenzie downgraded the safety protocols? Even with her limited understanding of the science, lowering the threshold to 40% was commercial suicide if anyone ever audited the machine. It made no sense to sabotage your own flagship product just to save a minor percentage on manufacturing costs. Dawson was greedy, but he was rarely stupid. I sat at my computer, pulling up the encrypted backup of the Apex financial ledgers I had secured before leaving. If the science did not make sense, I needed to follow the money. I spent hours running cross-references between the projected manufacturing budget and the real estate acquisitions of the board members. It was a tedious process, sifting through hundreds of shell companies and offshore holding accounts. Eventually, I found a pattern. A newly formed holding company, registered under a notoriously secretive corporate umbrella, had been aggressively purchasing property for the last 6 months. I ran the geolocations of the purchased parcels. My breath caught in my throat. The dots on the digital map were entirely concentrated in one area: Pine Ridge. They were buying up foreclosed homes and abandoned industrial lots for pennies on the dollar. Suddenly, the sinister equation balanced perfectly. The terror of their plan was absolute in its cruelty. Dawson did not want the filtration system to work safely. He wanted the downgraded machine to be installed in Pine Ridge. When the membrane inevitably failed, it would unleash a concentrated wave of volatile, bound toxins into the local water table. The town would become legally uninhabitable. The government would be forced to condemn the area and relocate the remaining poor residents. Once the town was empty, Dawson's shell company would own thousands of acres of prime, undeveloped real estate just outside the Chicago metropolitan zone. They would bring in municipal water lines from the city, rezone the land, and build a massive, luxury residential development. The illness of children like Noah was not an accident. It was a calculated operational expense. I closed my eyes, remembering a closed-door meeting I had accidentally overheard months ago. Dawson was pacing the room, lecturing Mackenzie on corporate philosophy. "Empathy is a marketing term, Mackenzie," he had said, his voice cold and flat. "Never let a human face distract you from a balance sheet. People are just numbers. If you want to build an empire, you have to be willing to erase the numbers that are in your way." They had normalized their own tyranny. They had convinced themselves that their wealth gave them the divine right to play God with the lives of the poor. They thought money insulated them from the laws of nature and the laws of men. They were wrong. I opened my eyes, the cold anger settling deep into my bones. I looked at the brass keycard sitting on my desk. I knew exactly how to erase their empire. The trap was ready. The illusion of safety in my garage laboratory was shattered on a rainy Thursday evening. I was recalibrating the flow sensors on the PVC pipes when the heavy, metallic pounding began against the roll-up door. It was not a polite knock. It was the aggressive, entitled hammering of a man who believed he owned every door he stood in front of. I wiped my hands on a microfiber cloth, walked over, and unlatched the side door. Dawson pushed past me before I could even speak, bringing the smell of expensive cologne and damp wool into my workspace. He stood in the center of the garage, his bespoke suit looking ridiculous against the backdrop of my cardboard boxes and concrete floors. He surveyed the homemade filtration machine, his lip curling in obvious disgust. Then, his eyes locked onto the beaker of crystal clear water sitting on the workbench. For a fraction of a second, I saw genuine shock register on his face. He knew the corporate laboratory team was failing miserably, and here I was, succeeding in a dusty garage. But a narcissist never lets awe survive for long. He quickly masked his surprise with a scowl of absolute authority. "I am not going to play these childish games with you anymore. Camellia!" He spat, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You have had your little temper tantrum. Now, you are going to open your laptop, log into the Apex mainframe, and give Mackenzie the override code for the microbial baseline." I leaned against the workbench, crossing my arms. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The fear he used to instill in me was completely gone. The system requires a precise biological understanding to operate safely, I replied, my voice flat and even. Mackenzie does not have it. She downgraded the safety threshold to 40%. You are planning to install a defective machine in Pine Ridge. Dawson waved his hand dismissively, as if the lives of an entire town were a trivial annoyance. That is corporate strategy. It is none of your concern. Your concern is your non-disclosure agreement. You built that algorithm while on my payroll. It belongs to me. If you do not hand over the password right now, I will call the police. I will have you arrested for corporate espionage and theft of intellectual property. I will bury you in so many legal fees you will be paying me back until the day you die. He stepped closer, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. He expected me to shrink back. He expected me to cry, to apologize, to beg for my job back. I did not move a single inch. I looked directly into his angry, desperate eyes. I saw exactly what he was, a hollow man terrified of losing his stolen empire. I let him talk. Dawson waited for my collapse, his chest heaving with manufactured righteous indignation. When I remained perfectly still, the silence in the garage stretched out, becoming heavy and suffocating for him. I reached into the pocket of my work apron and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen once, ending the voice recording application that had been running since the moment he started pounding on the door. I saved the audio file to a secure cloud server, right in front of him. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice pitching up slightly. "Documenting a threat of extortion," I said calmly, slipping the phone back into my pocket. "You just admitted, on tape, to prioritizing corporate strategy over environmental safety parameters, and you threatened to file false criminal charges to force my compliance. That is a federal offense. Dawson!" The color drained from his face. The aggressive posture dissolved, replaced by a sudden, frantic calculation. He was accustomed to bullying people in private corporate meetings, not dealing with someone who fought back with cold, methodical logic. "You are bluffing," he sneered, though his voice lacked conviction. "You have no money. You have no power. No one is going to listen to an ungrateful orphan from Pine Ridge." "They will listen to the water," I replied, gesturing to the beaker on the table. "And they will listen to the data. Now, get out of my laboratory. You are trespassing on private property." He opened his mouth to shout another threat, but he looked at the cold, unyielding expression on my face and stopped. He realized, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he had absolutely zero leverage. The invisible chain of gratitude he had forged was broken, and he had nothing left to control me with. He turned sharply, his expensive shoes scraping against the concrete, and stormed out the side door into the rain. If you love seeing an arrogant bully hit an unbreakable brick wall, drop a comment below and let me know. Your support keeps this story going. I locked the deadbolt behind him and let out a long, slow breath. The confrontation had not drained me. It had energized me. Dawson thought he was playing a game of intimidation. He did not realize we were playing a game of legal chess, and he was already out of moves. I walked over to my desk and picked up the heavy brass keycard Hayden had left me. Dawson had escalated the timeline. I could not wait any longer. Tomorrow morning, I was going to find out exactly what kind of armor my mentor had left me. It was time to strike. The next morning, at exactly 8 o'clock, I walked through the heavy glass doors of the Central Bank of Chicago. The air inside was climate-controlled and smelled of polished marble and old money. I approached the private client desk and placed the heavy brass keycard on the polished counter. The bank manager, a stern woman with silver hair, took the card and swiped it through her terminal. I watched her eyes scan the monitor. Her professional, neutral expression faltered. She went pale, glancing from the screen to me with a newfound, profound respect. "Right this way, ma'am," she whispered, her voice tight. "You need to see this." She led me down a quiet, carpeted hallway into the high-security vault area. She unlocked a large, heavy safety deposit box and left me alone in a private viewing room. Inside the box was a thick, leather-bound folder sealed with red wax. I broke the seal and opened it. The first page was a master patent certificate for the microbial filtration algorithm, bearing the official seal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. But it was the second document that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the legal mechanism of absolute destruction. Hayden had established an irrevocable trust. In the legal and financial world, an irrevocable trust is a fortress. Once it is created and the assets are transferred into it, the trust cannot be modified, amended, or terminated without the permission of the named beneficiary. The asset ceases to belong to the creator. 2 years ago, long before I had finalized the code, and long before I was forced to sign Dawson's predatory non-disclosure agreement, Hayden had legally registered the foundational architecture of the technology. He had transferred the intellectual property entirely into the Hayden and Camellia Eco Foundation. I read the notarized pages, the brilliance of Hayden's legal strategy washing over me. Dawson believed he owned my work because I built the final prototype while employed at Apex EcoCorp. But legally, a company cannot claim ownership of an asset that already belongs to an independent, pre-existing trust. The non-disclosure agreements I signed were void ab initio, meaning they were legally invalid from the moment my pen touched the paper. Apex EcoCorp did not own the technology. Mackenzie had stolen a product that her company had absolutely no legal right to commercialize. They were trying to sell a billion-dollar house, but I held the only deed to the land it was built on. I gently closed the leather folder. The sense of peace that washed over me was absolute. The empire was already dead. With the irrevocable trust documents securely in my bag, I drove back to my garage laboratory. I did not call Dawson to gloat. I did not send Mackenzie a warning text. Showing your hand prematurely is a mistake born of ego, and I had no ego left to feed. I only had a mission. I opened my laptop and bypassed the corporate network, searching for a very specific piece of contact information. I needed the direct, private email address of Jeremy, the lead venture capitalist whose firm was preparing to inject $150 million into Apex EcoCorp's Series B funding round. It took 30 minutes of digital digging, but I found it. Jeremy was known in the industry as a ruthless pragmatist. He did not care about family drama or corporate politics. He cared about viability, risk assessment, and return on investment. If he knew the technology he was buying was legally compromised and functionally dangerous, he would pull his funding faster than Dawson could blink. I drafted the email. I kept it cold, precise, and entirely transactional. I did not mention the theft, the emotional abuse, or the history of my employment. Subject Apex EcoCorp Series B. Critical Risk Assessment. Mr. Jeremy. You are currently evaluating a $150 million investment in the Apex Ecological Filtration Membrane. The prototype currently housed at Apex headquarters is running on a defective, downgraded safety algorithm that will result in catastrophic environmental liability. Furthermore, Apex EcoCorp does not hold the legal intellectual property rights to the core operational code. I have the fully functional, mathematically stable prototype. I also hold the sole legal rights to the technology, secured via an irrevocable trust established 2 years ago. If you wish to verify what you are actually purchasing before you transfer your capital, arrive at the address below tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is the exact time Apex is scheduled to give you their final demonstration. I attached a brief, 10-second video clip of my garage machine turning the toxic yellow water from Pine Ridge into crystal clear purity. I did not include a signature. I just typed the address of my garage. I read the email twice to ensure the tone was completely devoid of emotion. It was a simple business proposition, a presentation of undeniable facts. I moved the cursor and clicked send. The bait was officially set. The final 24 hours before the trap snapped shut were spent meticulously organizing paper. In the modern corporate world, shouting gets you escorted out by security, but irrefutable documentation gets you the keys to the kingdom. I turned on my heavy-duty laser printer and accessed the encrypted backup files I had pulled from the Apex servers. I needed the narrative of their fraud to be entirely visible on paper, requiring no verbal explanation from me. The system audit logs emerged first. This was the digital footprint of the crime. The log clearly showed the date, the timestamp, and the specific employee identification number that had accessed the safety parameters. Mackenzie's ID was stamped right next to the command that downgraded the microbial filtration threshold to 40%. It proved she had intentionally bypassed the safety protocols. Next, the financial records printed out. I highlighted the purchasing dates of the land in Pine Ridge, showing how they correlated perfectly with the timeline of Mackenzie's system downgrade. The correlation established premeditated, malicious intent to profit from a manufactured environmental disaster. If you believe that the most satisfying revenge is a flawless paper trail, please hit that like button and subscribe. The climax is approaching, and it is built entirely on undeniable facts. I took the freshly printed pages and arranged them into sleek, black presentation folders. I placed the system audit logs on the left side. I placed the financial shell company records on the right. Finally, I took the most important document, the notarized certificate of the irrevocable trust, bearing Hayden's signature and the federal patent seal, and placed it in a separate, red folder. This was the final nail in the coffin. The legal guillotine that would sever Dawson from his stolen wealth permanently. I lined the folders up neatly on my workbench, right next to the humming, fully operational filtration machine. The garage was clean. The water was running clear. The evidence was insurmountable. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Jeremy and his team would be arriving in exactly 1 hour. Dawson and Mackenzie were currently at the Apex headquarters, probably wondering why the venture capitalists were late for the final demonstration. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, pulled up a stool, and waited in the quiet hum of the laboratory. I felt no anxiety. I felt no hesitation. I was ready for them. Exactly at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a sleek, black town car pulled into the cracked driveway of my garage. A man stepped out, holding an umbrella against the lingering drizzle. Jeremy was exactly as his industry reputation suggested. He was sharp, calculating, and possessed an intense gaze that missed absolutely nothing. He walked into the garage, taking in the cardboard boxes, the concrete floor, and finally, the humming PVC pipe filtration system sitting on my workbench. He did not look amused. He looked intrigued. "Camellia," Jeremy said, offering a curt nod. "Your email was highly unusual. I canceled a meeting in a billion-dollar boardroom to stand in a damp garage. This machine better do exactly what you claimed." "It does," I replied calmly. I gestured toward the glass beaker. "That is raw, contaminated groundwater from Pine Ridge, purified at a microbial threshold of 99.9%. It is the exact threshold the original Apex EcoCorp blueprint promised." Jeremy stepped closer, lifting the beaker to the light. He inspected the absolute clarity of the water. He was a man who understood value, and he knew he was looking at an environmental miracle. Before he could ask his first technical question, the heavy roll-up door of the garage was violently shoved open. Dawson and Mackenzie burst into the room, flanked by 2 large security contractors and a man in a very expensive gray suit. Dawson was panting, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and sheer panic. Someone at Jeremy's firm must have tipped him off about the canceled meeting. "Jeremy?" Dawson gasped, attempting to smooth his wet hair and project authority. "Thank God we caught you. I apologize profusely for this absolute circus. This woman is a disgruntled, mentally unstable former employee. She stole proprietary company assets and lured you here to sabotage our funding round." Mackenzie stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger at me. She is a thief. That is my machine. She broke into the Apex servers and stole my life's work just because she is jealous of my position in the family. Jeremy slowly lowered the beaker of clean water. He looked at Dawson, then at Mackenzie, and finally at me. He was a predator sensing blood in the water, trying to determine who was actually bleeding. The security contractors stepped forward, trying to physically intimidate me away from the workbench. Dawson sneered, thinking his sudden arrival had completely derailed my plan. He expected me to shout, to defend myself, to engage in a messy, emotional, screaming match in front of the most important investor in the country. I did not raise my voice. I did not step back. I simply picked up the first black folder from my desk. I let them dig deeper. "Mr. Jeremy," I said, my voice completely level, cutting through Mackenzie's frantic accusations with ease. "I promised you a critical risk assessment of your $150 million investment. I prefer to let the data speak." I ignored my uncle and handed the first black presentation folder directly to Jeremy. He opened it, his eyes scanning the neatly highlighted pages. "On the left side," I explained, maintaining a steady, professional tone, "you will find the secure audit logs from the Apex mainframe. You will see a command executed 3 days ago, traced directly to Mackenzie's employee identification number. She manually downgraded the microbial filtration safety threshold to 40%. The machine she is currently trying to sell you is a toxic liability. If installed, it will bind heavy metals into a volatile state and poison the water supply." Mackenzie gasped, her face turning a sickly shade of white. "That is fabricated." She hacked the system to frame me. Jeremy did not even look at her. His eyes remained locked on the irrefutable digital footprint. He turned the page. "On the right side," I continued, "you will find the financial ledgers of a recently established shell company. You will notice the sole beneficiary is Dawson. For the past 6 months, this company has been purchasing foreclosed, contaminated land in Pine Ridge for pennies. The downgraded machine was never meant to clean the water. It was meant to trigger a localized environmental crisis, force a municipal evacuation, and allow Dawson to rezone the land for a luxury real estate development." The silence in the garage became absolute. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic hum of the filtration machine dispensing pure, clean water. Jeremy was a ruthless capitalist, but he was not a criminal. He did not invest in manufactured tragedies, and he certainly did not invest in executives who were foolish enough to leave a paper trail. He slowly closed the black folder. The look of polite corporate curiosity had vanished from his face, replaced by a gaze of absolute, chilling contempt. He turned his head and looked at Dawson. "You invited my firm to underwrite a federal crime," Jeremy said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You lied about the technology, you compromised the safety parameters, and you attempted to use my capital to fund a fraudulent real estate scheme." Dawson began to sweat profusely. He held up his hands, stammering, the polished CEO persona disintegrating completely. "Jeremy, please, you have to understand. It is a misunderstanding. The numbers, the projections, we can explain." "The Series B funding round is officially canceled," Jeremy interrupted, his tone final and absolute. "My legal team will be contacting the Federal Regulatory Commission before the end of the day." The financial guillotine finally fell. Dawson realized his billion-dollar empire was vaporizing right in front of his eyes. The desperation mutated into a frantic, cornered rage. If he could not have the funding, he was going to destroy the person who took it away. He snapped his fingers at the man in the expensive gray suit standing by the door. "Take the machine," Dawson barked. "Take the laptops, take the files, take everything. Shut this illegal operation down right now." The man in the suit stepped forward, holding up a thick stack of legal documents. He looked at me with the weary arrogance of a corporate lawyer accustomed to crushing the little guy. "Camellia," the lawyer said sharply, I represent Apex EcoCorp. I am holding an emergency court injunction signed by a superior judge this morning. You are formally accused of corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and violation of your non-disclosure agreement. This injunction grants us the immediate right to seize all stolen intellectual property on these premises. Step away from the workbench, or you will be arrested. Mackenzie let out a breath of relief, a cruel, vindictive smile creeping back onto her face. Dawson straightened his tie, believing he had found a loophole to survive. They thought this false counterattack would break me. They thought the threat of handcuffs would finally make me beg. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with the lawyer. I reached onto the workbench, picked up the red folder, and handed it directly to him. Before you attempt to enforce a fraudulent injunction based on perjury, I said softly, I suggest you read the deed to the property you are trying to repossess. The lawyer frowned, snatching the red folder from my hand. He flipped it open. I watched his eyes scan the federal patent seal. I watched him read the notarized signatures establishing the irrevocable trust. I watched him check the dates, realizing the trust had been executed 2 full years before I ever signed an Apex employment contract. A good lawyer knows when they hold a winning hand. A great lawyer knows when they have been completely checkmated. The blood drained from the lawyer's face. He closed the red folder slowly, holding it as if it were a live explosive. He looked at Dawson, shaking his head. Dawson, the lawyer said, his voice completely devoid of its previous confidence. This injunction is useless. Apex EcoCorp does not own this technology. We never did. It belongs to a pre-existing, independent trust. Continuing this action constitutes malicious prosecution. What are you talking about? Dawson screamed, grabbing the lawyer's arm. Fix it, I pay you to fix it. I cannot fix a void contract. The lawyer replied coldly, pulling his arm away. He turned and walked out the door, leaving his billionaire client behind. The empire turned to dust. The next morning dawned with a quiet, profound clarity. I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee, watching the financial news networks on my small television. The collapse of Apex EcoCorp was spectacular and incredibly fast. As soon as Jeremy's firm officially withdrew from the Series B funding round, the rumors of environmental fraud began to circulate. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the Apex stock price had plummeted by 60%. Shortly before noon, the news helicopters began circling the Apex corporate headquarters. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had raided the building, seizing servers, hard drives, and boxes of financial records related to the shell company in Pine Ridge. Dawson and Mackenzie were escorted out of the glass lobby in handcuffs, their faces shielded by expensive jackets. There was no physical violence. There was no screaming match. Their arrogance had simply been crushed under the unbearable weight of their own documented crimes. They had tried to weaponize the legal system against me, only to find themselves completely trapped by it. I turned off the television. I felt no pity for them, but I also felt no lingering anger. The space they had occupied in my mind for the last 4 years was finally empty. Later that afternoon, I sat in a pristine conference room at Jeremy's venture capital firm. We were not discussing Apex. We were discussing the future. Jeremy slid a thick contract across the mahogany table. $150 million, he said, tapping the paper. Structured as a philanthropic venture investment directly into the Hayden and Camellia Eco Foundation. We want to scale the filtration technology globally, but I understand you have a specific priority for the pilot program. Pine Ridge, I confirmed, picking up the pen. The town gets the first municipal filtration hub, at zero cost to the residents? Agreed, Jeremy nodded, offering a rare, genuine smile. You are a formidable woman, Camellia. Your mentor taught you well. I signed the document, finalizing the foundation. I had already called Haley that morning, offering her the position of Chief Operating Officer with a salary that reflected her actual worth. She had cried tears of joy, resigning from the sinking ship of Apex immediately. I walked out of Jeremy's office and stepped onto the busy Chicago street. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air feeling crisp and remarkably clean. I looked at the legal documents safely tucked inside my bag. We had a town to save. 1 month later, the central square of Pine Ridge was unrecognizable. The cracked pavement had been cleared, and a massive, gleaming municipal filtration hub stood proudly in the center of the town. The Hayden and Camellia Eco Foundation had worked around the clock to integrate the technology into the local water grid. The entire community had gathered for the activation. There were no politicians giving empty speeches, and there were no corporate banners. There were just tired, hopeful people waiting for a miracle. I stood near the main dispensing fountain with Haley by my side. I gave her a small nod, and she flipped the heavy activation switch. The deep, steady hum of the machinery vibrated through the ground. For a tense moment, the crowd held its breath. Then, the water began to flow. It cascaded out of the fountain, catching the afternoon sunlight. It was not the sickly, toxic yellow that had poisoned this town for decades. It was pure, crystalline, and absolutely beautiful. A cheer erupted from the crowd, a sound of profound relief that echoed off the old brick buildings. I felt a small hand tug at my jacket. I looked down to see Noah. He was holding a small plastic cup. The dark circles under his eyes were already fading, and the rattling cough had subsided significantly over the past few weeks. I smiled, knelt down, and helped him fill his cup from the fountain. Noah took a long, slow drink. He closed his eyes, savoring the feeling. When he looked at me, his smile was brighter than the sun. "It is sweet water, Auntie Camellia," he whispered. "It doesn't hurt anymore." I pulled him into a tight hug, resting my cheek against his hair. I looked up at the bright blue sky, knowing that Professor Hayden was somewhere, watching this moment, immensely proud of the armor he had helped me forge. I realized then that true power is not the corporate chair you steal, nor the wealth you hoard in secret accounts. True power is the legacy you leave behind for the most vulnerable people in the world. It is the ability to walk through the fire of betrayal and use the flames to build a sanctuary for others. I had lost a toxic family, but I had saved my home. If this story of finding your own power resonated with you, please share it. Subscribe for more stories. And remember, never let anyone else hold the pen to your future.